Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we have another Power Rankings video, week 23 of our Power Rankings series. So we do have a very interesting one here. Once again, lots of changes in the Power Rankings, and we may actually have a new #1 team. Stay tuned to the end to figure out the entire Power Rankings coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey Channel. Once again, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, trying to hit 650 in the next couple of weeks. And don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Also, if you haven't already, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. You can also check out the link that I have on my YouTube channel. It's an account I created just to help you guys support the channel, so if you can within your means, definitely don't forget to leave a donation. It really does help with the channel, helps me continue to run things here. And on top of that, don't forget to stay tuned for April and May, because we're going to be having some live streams for some playoff games coming out in April and May. So if you can, and it's something you might be enjoying, don't forget to check out in mid-April to figure out the schedule once the playoffs have been announced. But in today's video, we have another Power Rankings video. This is week 23 of our Power Ranking series. So once again, as per usual, we'll start with the 3 honorable mentions, and then we'll go to the top 10 teams in the Power Rankings, and there was actually quite a bit of movement here this week. So we'll start with the 3 honorable mentions. Now, the first honorable mention here I want to talk about is a team who has been heating up over the past couple of weeks. I contemplated putting 4 different teams in the honorable mentions this week, including Boston and Edmonton. However, those two just missed out on the cut. So here at the 3rd honorable mention spot, after a phenomenal week, having gone 8-1-1 in their last 10 games, we have the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers last week went 3-1-0 to get themselves up to 86 points. They're tied with Ottawa and Detroit with an exact same point total and game total played, and only 2 points back of Columbus for the last wildcard spot in the East with a game in hand. Philadelphia has gotten themselves back from the dead, and they are looking really good. Their 3-1-0 record, they wound up losing to Columbus coincidentally to start the week in regulation, but followed that up with a 3-game winning streak, beat Chicago 5-1, were able to take down Detroit 5-3, and then in a very narrow fashion beat the Dallas Stars 2-1 in overtime. So 6 out of possible 8 points, 3 out of possible 4 wins, nothing to scoff at. They might actually be in a playoff spot if they beat in Columbus. So all in all, Philadelphia has been looking phenomenal recently, and because of that, they've gotten themselves back into a playoff spot. Still think they probably miss, but they are looking really good right now, and that's why I'm putting them into the honorable mentions. Offensively, team's looking really good with guys like Konechny and Zegras. Defensively, not looking too shabby with Sanheim, and in net, both Urson and Vladar have been holding down the fort. So good stuff there from Philadelphia, but after going 8-1-1 their last 10, I think it's only right to put them at the 3rd honorable mention spot. The 2nd honorable mention spot, and another team who's had a phenomenal March, is the St. Louis Blues. Yes, the Blues had another stellar week, going undefeated 3-0-0, and with that are now only 4 points back of the last wildcard spot in the West. Yes, it's a snail or turtle race to the playoffs in the Western Conference, and the Blues are still one of the worst teams in the NHL. But they have been able to win a couple of games recently, and they are still in the playoff hunt. So all in all, solid stuff there from St. Louis. I think they've only lost like 2 or 3 times in regulation in March. So all in all, March has been phenomenal for the Blues, and they got themselves back into the playoff race. Same sort of thing with Philadelphia. I don't think they get in, but I think they deserve to be put into the honorable mentions after this run. So all in all, really solid stuff from the St. Louis Blues, who took down Washington, San Jose, and Toronto in last week's action. So very interesting note there, but after the stellar performance from that team, I think it's only right to put St. Louis into the honorable mentions. Offensively, team's looking great with a guy like Buchnevich and Snuggerud. Defensively, not looking too shabby with Broberg, and in net, Hofer has started to take over the starting role for the St. Louis Blues. So all in all, solid stuff there from St. Louis, but after another really stellar week, they wind up going into the 2nd honorable mention spot, and then the 1st honorable mention spot is the same as last week, and that's the New York Islanders. The Islanders had a pretty good week, going 2-1-0. I just don't think it was good enough to bump them back into the top 10 of the Power Rankings. They wound up starting out the week with a bad loss to Chicago Blackhawks. They bounced back quite well, taking down the Dallas Stars and following that with a win over the Florida Panthers. So 2 impressive wins to finish out the week. Sure, you definitely do not want to lose the Chicago Blackhawks. If you are in a playoff race, but entering Monday's game action, they were second in the Metro Division. They got themselves back above the playoff line. All in all, it was a pretty solid week there from the New York Islanders, and their offense is clicking, their offense is humming. I just don't think it was enough to put them back into the top 10. So they're going to stay here at the first honorable mention spot. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Barzal, with Horvat. Defensively, Schaefer's still doing pretty good in net. Sorokin is still holding down the fort in net. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Islanders. But after a winning record this week and getting back up into a top 3 spot in the Metro, I'm keeping the Islanders at the first honorable mention spot. So those were 3 honorable mentions. And next here, going over to the top 10 teams in the power rankings. So we're going to start off with the 10th team, and the 10th team falling from number 7 last week after what was definitely a subpar week. We have the Minnesota Wild. The Wild are now at a 41-21-12 record after going 1-2-0 last week. Didn't start out great. They had a really good lead, but blew it and lost to the Tampa Bay Lightning 6-3. Was not overly good there. Then they were able to take down the Florida Panthers following that in Florida, thanks to a very late goal from Eriksson Ek. But then they wound up finishing out the week with another regulation loss, this one to the Boston Bruins 6-3. So all in all, only got 2 points this week. They're sort of in coast mode. They know they're going to play the Dallas Stars. They know they're probably going to have to go on the road. So there's no real reason for the Minnesota Wild to push themselves too hard with the playoffs just a couple of weeks away. So it's not too surprising, in my opinion, that they are falling a little bit here. But I think going below 500, they deserve to drop. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Kaprizov, Boldy, and Johansson. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Brody and Faber. And in net, Gustafsson is still really solid from Minnesota. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Wild. But after a sub 500 week, they dropped to 10th spot in the power rankings. 9th spot in the power rankings, bumping down from the 8th spot last week, we had the Anaheim Ducks, who are up to a 41-28-4 record after going 2-1-0. Once again, just because of some other teams having better weeks, I do bump the Ducks down to the 9th spot in the power rankings, but no offense to them, they had a solid week. They end the week on a sour note, losing to the Edmonton Oilers to keep the Oilers in the race for the Pacific Division title. But they started the week really well with a couple of wins against low-ranked Western Conference teams in the Canucks and the Flames, some very narrow games that they were able to come from behind and win. So all in all, for a possible 6 points, you'd like to see them probably get at least a point out of Edmonton, but they're still 3 points ahead with the game in hand, entering Monday's game action for top spot in the Pacific Division. So I think it could have been a lot worse, and because they are still the best team in the Pacific Division, I'm going to keep them here at the 9th spot in the power rankings, dropping only 1 spot from last week. Offensively, team's looking great with Gauthier, with Carlson, with Terry. Defensively, not too shabby with guys like Minyakov and Carlson. And in net, Dawson's still pretty good. So all in all, even though they lost to Edmonton, they still had a pretty dang good week, and that's why I'm only bumping the Ducks down to 9th spot in the power rankings. At the 8th spot in the power rankings, bumping up from the 9th spot last week, we have the Ottawa Senators, who are up to a 38-25-10 record after going 2-1-1. Once again, did not end the week overly great as they blew a 2-goal lead and lost 4-2 to a red-hot Tampa Bay Lightning team, which you could definitely say was a pretty hard task for the Ottawa Senators, but they did have a 2-0 lead at one point. However, to start out the week, they were great. Got a very narrow win over the New York Rangers that lost a couple of defensemen on the second half of a back-to-back, took down the Detroit Red Wings with Yakimchuk having a really solid game, and then they were able to at least muster a point in what was a rather poor performance against the Pittsburgh Penguins. They lost 4-3 in a shootout. So once again, could have been better. Yeah, it could have definitely been better, but 5 all possible 8 points, and ending the week only 2 points back of a playoff spot when they were actually in a playoff spot on Tuesday. It's not the worst thing in the world, and they still control their own fate. They have a game left against the Islanders, 2 games in hand, and are only 3 points back. So once again, if the Senators want to get in, they're probably going to try and chase down the New York Islanders. But yeah, Ottawa had a pretty solid week, getting 5 possible 8 points, and I think they deserve to be put here at the 8th spot in the power rankings. So offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Stützle, Batherson, Cozens. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Yakimchuk and Zub. And in net, Allmark's been doing pretty good over the past little while. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Sens. But after getting 5 out of 8 points, I do put them them up here to the 8th spot in the power rankings. 7th spot in the power rankings, and bumping down from 4th spot last week is the Columbus Blue Jackets. As the Jackets had a sour week, they're down to a 38, 34, and 12 record after going 1-2-1. They started the week pretty well, like we talked about. They beat the Philadelphia Flyers, which was great, but followed that up with 3 consecutive 1-goal losses. First it was to Montreal 2-1, then it was to San Jose 3-2, and then they blew a 3-0 lead and lost 4-3 in a shootout to the Boston Bruins. So some crucial losses to teams like Boston and Montreal. However, they are still in the second wildcard spot. They going into Monday's game action. We're only a point out of second spot in the Metro, so once again, it was not a great week. It was the first real bad week for the Columbus Blue Jackets in quite some time, but they are still in a playoff spot, are still doing pretty good. They're due for a bad week, so I'm only going to drop them down here to 7th. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Marchenko, Marchment, Johnson. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Matejchuk and Warinsky, and in net, Merzlikins and Greaves especially have both been great over the past little while. So on all solid stuff there from the Jackets, but after not finding their scoring touch this week, I do drop them to 7th spot in the power rankings. 6th spot in the power rankings, dropping from 5th spot last week, is the Dallas Stars. Identical record this week to the Jackets. They went 1-2-1, which has dropped them to a 44, 18, and 12 record. So once again, the Dallas Stars, sort of like the Minnesota Wild, are going to coast for the rest of the regular season because they know they're going to face the Minnesota Wild. They can't catch Colorado anymore. So because of all of that, not surprising to see them lose a couple of games this week. They wound up winning over the Pittsburgh Penguins, which was great, but they lost in regulation to the Devils. They lost in regulation to the Islanders, as we talked about, and they lost in extra time to the Flyers, like we talked about. So once again, 3 out of possible 8 points. You don't want to see that. But the Stars are already locked into the 2nd spot in the Central Division, probably the 2nd spot in the entire NHL. So I'm not too surprised that the Stars are falling a little bit here, but once again, I'm only dropping them 1 spot. There were a couple of really close games there, and I don't think that they deserve to fall too far. So even though they go 1-2-1, I'm going to drop them here to 6th. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Johnston, with Richkovian, with Duchesne. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Myers and Lindell. And in net, Ange's been doing pretty good. So on all slots left there from Dallas, but I'm only dropping them 1 spot to number 6 in the power rankings. At the 5th spot in the power rankings, bumping up from the 10th spot last week after a stellar week, best week of any of these teams that we're talking about here in the power rankings, we have the Montreal Canadiens, who finished the week 4-0-0. They were undefeated, and they had some pretty impressive wins. They were able to take down the Nashville Predators. As we talked about, they took down the Columbus Blue Jackets, and twice they beat the Carolina Hurricanes. Yes, the Habs beat the Metro and tied for East leading Carolina Hurricanes twice in 1 week. So yeah, I think it's really safe to say the Montreal Canadiens deserve to be bumped up quite a bit from the 10th spot of the power rankings. They started to solidify themselves a little bit as a 3rd team in the Atlantic Division, and they are looking really good. They're still 4 points back of Tampa and Buffalo, but they're not out of striking distance, and they are still looking really good. Their goaltending is starting to shore up, and they're starting to look like a really competitive and competent team. So because of all of that, because of the undefeated week they had, because of how dominant they've been looking, I'm going to put the Montreal Canadiens here as the 5th team in the power rankings, bumping up 5 spots. Offensively, the team's looking really good with guys like Caulfield or Mr. Saturday, Suzuki, Newhook. Defensively, not too shabby with guys like Hudson and Gooley, and in net, Dobish and Fowler have both been great for the Habs. So on also stuff there from Montreal, both some solid goaltending. They've been unstoppable, and now they are bumped up to 5th spot in the power rankings. 4th spot in the power rankings, bumping down 2 spots from last week, is a team who's actually lost to Montreal Canadiens twice last week, and that is the Carolina Hurricanes, as they fall to 46, 21, and 6 after going 1-2-0. They beat the Devils on the weekend, which wasn't half bad, but like we talked about, they lost to Montreal twice, so it wasn't overly good there. Now that one win over the Devils does have them only 2 points back of triple digits, does have them tied with Buffalo and Tampa for top spot in the Eastern Conference. They have a big week ahead of them, but they are still in a comfortable spot when it comes to being the Metro Division leaders. So all in all, not surprising stuff there from the Carolina Hurricanes, but I'm going to bump them down a couple of spots because they lost to Montreal twice. So very interesting note there, but I only bumped them down here to the 4th spot in the power rankings. Offensively, team's looking really good with guys like Svechnikov, Jarvis, and Ehlers. Defensively, nothing too shabby with guys like Slavin and Gostisbehere. And in net, Boosie's still been pretty good for the Hurricanes. So all solid stuff there from the Canes, but they are 4th in the power rankings. Third in the power rankings, bumping up from the 6th spot last week after another stellar week that extended their point streak. We had the Tampa Bay Lightning. They wound up going 3-0-1 this week, which was impressive stuff there from the Lightning. They took down the Minnesota Wild in an impressive fashion. They took down the Nashville Predators, as we talked about. They took down the Ottawa Senators. And they also had a narrow overtime loss to the Seattle Kraken. So 7 out possible 8 points. They're now tied with Buffalo for top spots in the Atlantic Division. All in all, that's a pretty dang good week for Tampa, and they are 2 points away from being the first team in the Eastern Conference to the triple-digit point mark. So I think Tampa's on like a 7 or 8 game point streak, so I think it's only right to put them back into the top 3 after what has been a pretty impressive last couple of weeks. Offensively, teams look really good with guys like Kucherov, Goncalves, and Hagel. Defensively, not going too shabby with guys like Moser and McDonough, and in net, Vasilevsky has still been Vasilevsky. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Bolts, but after continuing on with their point streak, tying Buffalo for top spot in the Atlantic, they get up to 3rd spot in the power rankings. 2nd spot in the power rankings, who I actually consider for a little bit going back up to number 1, but I'm going to keep them at number 2 here after they were 3 last week, is the Colorado Avalanche, who are up to a 48-14-10 record after going 2-1-0 this week. Points-wise, they basically locked up the President's Trophy. They are looking phenomenal. They wound up opening the week with a win over the Pittsburgh Penguins in dominant fashion before splitting a home-and-home with the Winnipeg Jets. So all in all, could have been better. Yeah, they could have beaten the Winnipeg Jets, but they are running away with the President's Trophy. They have a huge cushion on the Dallas Stars, who are the next closest team. And honestly, unless they go on some sort of a terrible tailspin, I do not believe this team is going to falter. I do believe this team's going to probably win the President's Trophy. So all in all, they've been looking phenomenal the last couple of weeks. They're still points-wise the best team in the NHL, and I think it's only fair to bump them up here to 2nd spot in the power rankings. Offensively, teams looking pretty good with guys like Lehkonen, Nichushkin, and Landeskog. Defensively, not going too shabby with guys like Malinsky and Burns, and in net, Wedgwood continues to be a really solid goaltender for the Avalanche. So solid stuff there from Colorado, but they get bumped up here to the 2nd spot in the power rankings. And the top spot in the power rankings, staying from last week, is the Buffalo Sabres. I did contemplate a couple of times moving them out, maybe moving a team like Colorado or Tampa Bay or potentially even Montreal into the top spot in the power rankings, but I'm going to keep them here one more week. They didn't have a great week. They're up down to a 45-21-8 record after going 1-1-1. If they have another bad week like this and they lose a couple more games next week, I probably would bump them out of the 1st spot in the power rankings, but they're going to stay here for at least one more week. They start out the week with a bad loss to the Boston Bruins in extra time. Then they fell at the hands of the Detroit Red Wings in regulation before they wound up coming from behind and taking down the Seattle Kraken 3-2 in a shootout. So once again, definitely losing 2 out of 3 games is not really good. They have another very important week here coming up for the Buffalo Sabres, but still, they're tied for top spot in the Atlantic Division and top spot in the Eastern Conference. They're only 2 points back of triple digits, something they haven't done in quite a bit of time, and they still do look like they're one of the teams who are going to be playoff bound. All in all, Buffalo's still looking really good, and because of all of that, I'm going to keep them at the top spot in the power rankings, but once again, just for this week. If they have another bad week, that might change. So very interesting note there, but I'm keeping Buffalo at 1 here. Offensively, teams looking really good with Thompson, Doan, and Quinn. Defensively, I'm not looking too shabby with guys like Dahlin and Samuelson. And in net, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Lyon have both been great. So all in all, decent stuff there from the Sabres, and I'm going to keep them at the 1st spot in the power rankings. So definitely, those are my power rankings as of week 23. There was no changes in the actual top 10. I did change a couple of the honorable mentions from last week, but there was no actual changes into the top 10 of the power rankings. So those same 10 teams who were in the top 10 last week are in the top 10 this week. So very interesting note there. But just to recap, here's my top 10 teams in the power rankings for week 23. So at 10 you have Minnesota, 9 is Anaheim, 8 is Ottawa, 7 is Columbus, 6 is Dallas, 5 is Montreal, 4 is Carolina, 3 is Tampa Bay, 2 is Colorado, and number 1 again is Buffalo, but that could change as early as next week. So definitely, let your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And if you disagree with me, who would be in your top 10 of the power rankings entering Monday's game action? Love your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really like to, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Once again, stay tuned for my live videos coming out in April and May, as I'm going to be doing some game streams in April and May. So definitely don't forget to check out the channel, as I will be having some updates when the playoff schedule is announced. And I'll also do a blog, talk about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. We'll link to that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.